Hi, I'm Ravi.
And I'm Shell.
And you're listening to Two Lost Souls,
the podcast that guides you through the journey to becoming a CBT therapist.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you are listening. Welcome to the Two Lost Souls podcast. The title of today's episode is Where Do I Begin? I'm your host, Ravi Amrith, and in today's show, we will be discussing our top tips for you getting your feet under the table and getting ready to get stuck in your first few weeks at uni and on placement. Let me begin, though, by saying that this is your podcast guide to surviving a high-intensity CBT course. We pride ourselves on creating a safe space for trainees, qualified therapists, and those who are generally curious. Honesty is our policy, and we tell it how we see it, but we'd love to hear your views too. As usual, I'm joined in the therapy room today by the slick Michelle Sudbury. How's it going, Michelle?
It's really good, thank you. How are you, Ravi?
I'm good. How has your day been today?
It's been really good. So slick, I guess, is because I've been quite greasy most of today. Is that what you're getting at?
I couldn't see that when you walked into the room.
I've washed my hair.
Okay.
I have washed my hair. Yeah, so I've been to a spa today and had a lovely massage and just been pampered a bit.
Yeah. So people who pay attention to our interactions on Twitter may have seen that you mentioned that you were going to have a fire and ice experience, and I'm highly intrigued by this. I had mental images of both barbecues and ice creams and matches and ice cubes and sort of also Disneyland on ice and Disneyland on fire kind of things going on in my mind. So I'm wondering what it was actually like.
Well, nothing like that.
Oh.
Disappointingly. No, it was but basically you go through different sections of spa experiences.
Right.
So saunas and then ice bucket drenches, and then there's like one with actual ice that you kind of rub all over yourself, and then you go into a hydrotherapy pool. So you alternate between hot and cold, basically.
Right. Okay.
Try not to induce a heart attack.
Okay.
I think that's the aim.
Got you. And where in particular did you go for this Bush Tucker trial?
I went to the Belfry.
Oh.
Yeah, the spa there.
Very fancy.
I was there today.
Amazing. And did you leave on fire or iced? Which one did you end with?
Probably the fire, I think, because nobody wants to come out cold, eh?
Right. Okay.
That's not fun.
Got you. If the Belfry would like to contact us for any sponsorship opportunities, we would obviously be very receptive to those. What would you rate the experience out of 5, Shell?
Ooh, 3.
3. Oh.
Treatments were great. Fire and ice was good.
Right.
Pool let it down.
Oh dear.
Too many kids.
Oh no.
I know.
Sadly, this is what you get for visiting a spa during half term.
I know. Rookie error. I'm sure they had a great time. That's good.
Okay. Well, yeah, at least they enjoyed it, I suppose.
That's it.
That's something.
That's the main thing.
Before we move on with the episode today, let me just remind you all out there that if you have any particular questions or topics that you would like to see covered, reach out to us on Twitter at TLS_pod or by email at twolostsoulspodcast@gmail.com. So, as we mentioned at the top of the show, this episode is all going to be about what your first few weeks look like, both in terms of the academic side of things at uni and also getting your feet under the table at placement as well. And I suppose to start with, when it came to your training experience, Shell, what did the first weeks of uni sort of look like for you?
The first 2 weeks of uni were the intense weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I was expected to be in university every day for a 2-week block.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, you're introduced to the concept of CBT. You are taught the very, very basics. So a little bit of theory, a little bit of its origins, and then a lot of work on beginning to start your first sessions with a client. So 5 areas model was quite a large part of that teaching. And it finished, the first 2-week block finished with a observed practice. So you had to deliver a very basic 5 areas example with a colleague, which was marked by the tutors. And if you passed it, you could go on to see real people on placement. Yeah.
Okay. What would happen if you didn't pass it?
I don't know. I don't think anybody has never not passed it. It's quite simple. It's very nerve-wracking because you're in front of everybody, but it's not difficult. Right. So I don't see why you wouldn't pass it. But if you don't, I'm sure you just have another go until you get it right. But yeah, and I'm pretty sure they account for nerves.
Yeah, of course. I think it was also from my experience of going through what was a similar, if not the same, sort of process. It was also quite a constructive thing as well, in terms of it being a real opportunity for the teachers to give you some constructive feedback on your practice, and I think they really do take it into account that it might be your first time ever doing something like that at all, and particularly being observed live doing it as well, so they definitely do take that into account.
Yeah, so did you have a similar thing then?
I did, yeah. So similar to you, it was 2 weeks of quite intense teaching, and like you said, kind of learning how to begin treatment journeys with clients, but also dipping into some of the more sort of overarching aspects of CBT as well. So things like formulation.
Yes.
And what formulations are, what they do, and also really important aspects of the therapeutic process, like getting people into the right sort of emotional space in sessions as well.
Yeah.
A really good mix of sort of theoretical learning and also experiential stuff as well. And I think my main recollection from it was how interactive it was, and how it also allowed us to really mix as a cohort.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you can get a bit stuck in terms of working with people that you know, or working with people that you're on placement with. But my memories of my first couple of weeks is that it really allowed us to sort of mingle in and interact, and get a good sense of the rest of the cohort as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's really taken me back, because I remember making a promise to myself on my first day at university that I was going to sit in a different seat every day, because I didn't want to, because I know that I like comfort, and I'll sit at the back, I'll find somebody, and I will just stick to them like glue for the whole course. And I didn't want to do that, so I made myself move around the room, and that was brilliant, really, because you got to meet everybody and have lots of new experiences.
Yeah. Well, a question that's just shown up for me just as you were talking there, Shell. I mean, what do you think someone could do if they found that they were the only person on their placement within that particular cohort?
Yeah. Well, that was me.
Okay.
So I was one of those. I was the only person from the team that I was working in who was doing the course at that time. In that instance, you've definitely got to gel and meet up with other people on the course, because it is quite isolating to do that on your own. Hopefully it's not going to be many people's experiences. We were, I think, like I explained right at the beginning, we were a last minute, somebody had dropped out and a space became available, so I got put forward for it.
Right.
But yeah, hopefully it's not going to be many people's experiences. You want to really, ideally, be with a couple of peers, I think, at placement.
I think it's important to say that even if you're not in that position in terms of not having peers, I think it's really important, and probably emphasises even more the importance of making links with your wider cohort, and using those as much as you can. So I know that something that was quite useful, and I know that a variety of views are available on this, but something that was useful for my cohort was that we had a joint WhatsApp group, and it became quite the hotbed of ideas and information exchange, and even just support during some of the more tough times on the course as well. And I know that not everyone out there is a fan of the WhatsApp group, and I think some WhatsApp groups can be more scary than others, and we tend to put them on mute a lot, but I think it's definitely a resource that can be used for good in these particular scenarios, particularly if people are feeling quite isolated.
Definitely. We did the same, actually. So we had the main WhatsApp group for the whole cohort, and people who didn't want to join didn't, and that was fine. And then we had kind of spin-off WhatsApp groups as well. So our peer supervision group, our university supervision group, had their own WhatsApp, more for practical purposes, really, just so we could let our supervisor know if somebody was running late or was ill, etc., because it was quite useful. But yeah, we shared a lot of information. We shared resources. I don't know what I would have done without it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember, and I think this probably gets said throughout multiple facets of the course, but you also get out what you put in as well. And if you invest those time in interactions with people, you generally tend to find that it sort of pays dividends down the line as well.
Yeah, 100%. So as well as moving chairs, the other thing that I also promised I would do would be volunteer for everything.
Right, yeah.
And I did. I volunteered for everything. No, the only thing I didn't put myself forward for was student rep.
Right.
Did not fancy that job. But every single example or live demonstration, I would kind of pop my hand up, because I hate that stuff, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get myself out of my comfort zone.
Of course, yeah. And I suppose it also helps to avoid that awkward silence that can sometimes descend when they're looking for volunteers and no one wants to take part.
It's a big thing, right? Yeah. Like walking up to the front of that room and sitting in front of maybe 30 odd people, and then doing a CBT technique with a tutor who knows so much more than you do, and having to use one of your own live examples, and it's really daunting. But you do get an awful lot from that experience. I don't know, did you do any? Did you put yourself up for any?
I did, not just during the first few weeks, but throughout the course as well. I think what sort of dawned about my cohort is that I think we let that awkward silence win a lot of the time, which was sometimes a bit of a shame. But also, I think my take on it was, I think there was a point where I felt that maybe I was saying a bit too much.
Yes.
And from my standpoint, I wanted to be very mindful that if I was saying too much, I was depriving people of the opportunity from having their voice heard.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to make sure that, other people got opportunities as well. So I started to hold myself back a bit and sort of enjoy things from a different perspective.
Yeah, I was also quite mindful of that. And because I've got social anxiety, then I really do worry about monopolising time and space as though I don't deserve it. But actually, I thought I'm never going to get this opportunity again.
Right.
And if other people aren't prepared to come out of their comfort zones or don't want to take these opportunities, I'm not going to sit back and wait for others to kind of put themselves forward when they don't want to. I'm going to volunteer.
Right.
So I think I was a bit more selfish about it than you were.
I think that's a really inspiring way of looking at it, though. I think knowing that, I mean, you mentioned social anxiety there, and knowing that it is a hugely brave and hugely challenging thing to be standing or sitting in front of a class of 20 to 30 people, and not always dealing with a subject matter that's very easy as well, knowing that sometimes it's not just role plays, it's real plays as well. I think it takes a lot of courage to be able to do that.
That's my big thing, really. It's, I'm going to ask eventually when I qualify, I'm going to be asking real people to do this, to be vulnerable, to expose their kind of stuff. And if I'm not prepared to do it, then who am I to ask others to do it? So that's my big thing, and I think that was my driving motivation behind it. But I did make these deals with myself from day one.
Yeah.
And I think it served me well.
Yeah. that's as I said, I think, and I know I've said this word a couple of times, but I think it's definitely inspiring to look upon it that way. And it sounds like you took a lot, not only from those first couple of weeks, but it sounds like opportunities throughout the course. And I suppose to run with that train of thought a bit more, what sort of tips do you have in terms of people making the most of those first couple of weeks that were available to them?
So yeah, getting around the cohort, introducing yourself, being interested in other people as well, remembering that you're all going to be a bit anxious and nervous.
Right.
I think that's really useful. Trying to do something outside of the university together is also really nice.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be all of you, but if you can arrange, I don't know, to go and have a coffee or go for lunch, and talk about your families, your interests, things outside of the CBT world, just to kind of take you out of that space for half an hour or so.
Right.
Because it's very intense, isn't it, the course?
It is.
It's nice to talk about things that aren't related to it.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing, really. It's trying to not make, you don't have to make friends. I mean, it's nice if you do that, but it is nice to feel like you're part of something, and that if you needed some support, there'd be people there for you.
100%.
Try not to isolate yourself, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. And I think there's something quite powerful in embracing it as a joint experience amongst everyone as well. And again, knowing that there will be some challenging times ahead, but in sort of learning about each other, you learn that you've got each other there for support as you go down the line as well, which is a very powerful thing. Not that this always falls within the initial 2 or 3 week block, but I think it sort of starts to creep in at the last week, and that's the topic of supervision.
Yes.
I'm wondering what should firstly someone be taking to their first supervision while they're on the course, but also what's the difference between university supervision and placement supervision?
Oh, so I might put that one back on you. So
Okay.
University supervision, what do you remember taking to your first?
I'll be honest, absolutely nothing. So the first, I think sometimes you can get caught up in the pressure of feeling like you have to take something to supervision straight away and sort of hit the ground running, and begin sort of submitting recordings towards the 8 recordings that you need to submit in supervision. In the first 15 supervisions. However, the first supervision for me was all about, I suppose, much like it is in therapy, in the first session of therapy, it was all about relationship building and getting to know the person you're going to be supervised by, getting to know the people that were in your supervision group, signing contracts as well, so knowing what your rules and responsibilities were in terms of partaking in the supervision process. There was someone in my group who did present a recording straight away, and I think the rest of us left feeling slightly demoralised by it.
Very inadequate.
But looking back on it now and knowing that we all made it through that process in the end, and we all passed supervision and all passed the course.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not so worried about that anymore. And I think if anyone's out there listening to this and is worried about immediately having something to play at supervision, or immediately feeling like they need to bring a case at supervision, you don't need to do that straight away. There is time to at least that one session to kind of just get an understanding for what supervision is and what things are going to look like as a process going forward.
And there will be people who have never experienced supervision. They don't actually know what clinical supervision is. I was absolutely amazed when I spoke to a very qualified mental health nurse who should have been having quite regular supervision, but actually it was never prioritised because their job on a ward was so busy, and they'd never had had supervision. So actually knowing what clinical supervision is might be something that people are going in and just not being aware of that.
I think also sort of the framing of it as well. So I think when you first hear the word supervision, first learn about what it is, and typically you'll do that in a lecture or a talk session, as opposed to in supervision.
Yeah.
It will sometimes feel as though, I don't want to, punitive's not the right word,
Okay.
but it can feel as though it's an element of sort of being checked up on in
Yeah.
some ways. But I think it's really important to frame it as a tool that's there for your support and your learning, and
Yes.
is an incredibly supportive and welcoming environment as well, or at
be.
least it should be.
Yeah.
Which is why I think particularly that first session in terms of signing contracts and understanding what you and the supervisor expect from the process is a really important thing to undergo.
Definitely. Yeah.
What about the second part of that question then? What's the difference between university supervision and placement supervision?
So typically your university supervision will be within a group. I don't know if there are many courses that would offer it on a one-to-one basis, but usually it's like a peer support as well. And at placement, it would normally be one-to-one. I can't say that all services will work like that, but in our service, that's how we work. And it's an hour a week with your supervisor. You are expected to bring recordings, audio and visual, if that's a possibility. You may have things like live supervisions, which I know I requested from you and we never actually got around to doing.
Don't expose me like that, Shell. I may not have been the only one who didn't.
No. Lots of people don't get around to doing live supervision, and it's not a requirement. It's been much more difficult in COVID times with us all working so remotely. But live supervision is basically what it says on the tin. It would be your supervisor being present in the room during an actual session.
Can I offer a devil's advocate aside to that as well?
Of course.
That actually, I suppose, in a sense, working during COVID and working remotely also makes it slightly easier in terms of you're not sitting there in a room with the client and having the client constantly look behind you at the person who's supervising you, given
That's
that it's just an icon on the screen.
That's a really good point, Ravi. I wonder why we never got round to it. Avoidance. So you'll have that. But in terms of what you bring to supervision, the pretty similar. You'd still be expected to bring a supervision question.
Yeah.
That's both to placement and university. It's no good just rocking up and saying, well, I've got a client, I don't really know what to do with them.
Yeah.
Supervisors don't like that.
No.
They'll often send you away and say, come back when you've got a good question for me.
Yeah.
Because that's important. Supervision is not about us telling you what to do next.
And it's also taking the time to reflect on a case to an extent before supervision as well. Again, thinking about putting the shoe on the other foot, how frustrating is it as a therapist when you have the client in the room going, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I want from this.
Yeah, exactly.
It's sort of the same with the supervisory process in terms of kind of rocking up with an actual objective in mind as to what you want to get from a particular recording or what you want to get from a particular session as well.
But we've all done it, right?
Yeah.
We've all been massively underprepared for supervision. We've turned up, we haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about what we're bringing, and we've just kind of garbled something out. It happens. It's a really busy course. So you're not going to use every single one of your supervision sessions to its best potential, I suppose. But if you work well with your supervisor to kind of create a bit of an agenda, treat it like you would therapy. I think that's a really good point. The same demands that we put on our clients, we should put on ourselves for supervision. We should be prepared. We should have a question. There should be an agenda.
Yeah. 100%. I think that framework is really important. Zooming out slightly, one thing that has come up when I have had some discussions with new trainees recently is particularly in terms of the layout of the entire year. There's been a big focus on this phrase of sort of hitting the ground running.
Yes. And
a big question that comes up is, what can I do now during the first couple of weeks to make the rest of the year easier on myself? My general response to that is a mixture of a few things. So there are things even in the final practice portfolio that can kind of be taken care of now. So things like taking a look at some literature reviews.
Yes.
And reading some important parts of literature, because it's at this part of the journey where you haven't really been taught particularly diagnostic specific things yet, and if you want to maybe take a look at that and also count it as something to be considered for a literature review, now that's a really good way of killing two birds with one stone. But also I think there's something to be said for actually making the most of that first couple of weeks and enjoying it, and sort of taking some time for self-care if you can. So knowing, particularly from the perspective of someone who's now qualified or semi-qualified and doing this 5 days a week, it's quite the wake-up call. So it's really nice to sort of have that time to sort of treasure that experience and take your time while you have it.
Yeah, that's true. The first 2 weeks are a bit more gentle. So it is intense because you're there every single day, but it's more gentle in that it's your introductory phase. It's kind of telling you what to expect. And then you do hit the ground running. So you are expected to have your first clients in the week after that. So you don't have a lot of time. If you've done a PWP course, it will be very different. You'll have had a little bit of time to get used to what you're going to be doing, and then booking in assessments and doing something, that feels like a natural progression, but you don't get that with high intensity. So it can be hard, but I think if you're struggling with your 8 to 10 a week caseload, then when you're qualified, it's a big step up.
Sure. I think as well, using just in terms of making the ongoing process easier as well, working on sort of record keeping templates as well. So knowing that you're going to have to submit logs for supervisions, logs of client hours, logs of close supervisions, logs every time you sneeze. It's a good thing to get those templates sort of drawn up and ready, just so they're ready for you to just enter numbers into, rather than feeling as though you need to engage in a bit of a scramble at the end of the course as well.
Oh, definitely. You've got to do it as you go along. You will get in such a mess if you leave it. Just start it from day dot. Even if you don't do it on the official forms, but you keep your own spreadsheets and stuff, you'll get in such a mess if you don't. And it will be a really horrible kind of end to the course because you'll be so busy.
Yeah, agreed. And I think one of the key takeaways from that is do what works for you. Kind of seizing what you said there on not doing it on the official templates. It doesn't have to be to start with. I think doing whatever works for you in terms of record keeping and making sure that it's a system that is sustainable and something that you'll be able to keep doing throughout the year, I think is a really key point. So let's take a short break there, and we will be back in a couple of minutes to discuss what the work side of things or the placement side of things looks like. Don't go away. Welcome back to Two Lost Souls. I hope you've had a good break. Now, in the second part of today's show, we're going to focus on what the placement side of things looks like when you start out. I've got a really noisy mouth. I can't stop salivating. Said Pavlov's dog. Excuse me.
Are you going to give that any context? Why have you got a noisy mouth?
If I give it context, it means we have to keep it in the show. I have a noisy mouth because Shell has very kindly given me an organic ginger turmeric shot from her stay at the spa. Is it from the spa?
No, it's from Lidl.
Oh, it's from Lidl. Oh, sorry. I thought this was something they gave you at the spa. I thought it was a detoxy kind of thing.
No, they're just delicious. You don't think so?
They're an acquired taste.
They're amazing.
I think
they are quite strong though.
They are very strong.
It's taken all the lining off your throat.
Yes, it has. So if I do sound radically different in this second part of the show,
It'll be your noisy mouth.
that'll be well, it will be my lack of throat lining
Yeah.
and a noisy mouth, which are words that I never thought I would say in my life.
Your mum is going to be so disappointed in you.
She's going to be disappointed that the turmeric drink I've had is from a can and not one that I have meticulously prepared myself at home. Turmeric is a very well revered Indian home remedy for things.
But Lidl have made it easy for you.
This is true, yeah. Unlike my ancestors, I don't need to actually stand by a boiling pot of water. I can just crack open a can.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to Lidl, where dreams are made. In part two, starting now, we are going to have a discussion about what the placement side of things looks like in terms of your first few weeks. And I suppose just to kind of start with, I mean, you mentioned earlier this sense of sort of slowly building a caseload up to 10
Yes.
or 12. What does that look like to start with, and what do the first couple of weeks look like for someone who's just starting out?
So talking about it from the service that I work at's perspective, because I guess every provider is going to be slightly different. And we usually support our trainees to have their clients from the step 2 waiting list initially. So they're not really working with high intensity clients, they're working with PWP clients. But for their first 2 or 3, it's quite a nice way to start to use your skill. And we encourage people to get up to their 10 a week as quickly as possible, because you need to get your hours. You've got to have your 200 completed hours. So you need to have enough clients to do that and to accommodate for things like DNA, annual leave, and cancellations.
Got you. And it sounds like as well, I mean, to use a phrase that came up a lot during the first part of the show today, there's an emphasis to an extent of kind of hitting the ground running as well.
Definitely. One of the things that we've adapted and changed a little bit is our induction process. Are you still enjoying that drink?
I'm very much enjoying that drink. I've got the mute button on my side of the table, so you don't need to hear me sort of burping and hear the throat lining being slowly.
You just need to get it down
throat.
now, neck it, and it's gone.
I think that might be a bit far.
And it can do its goodness. Yeah. So one of the things that we've worked really hard to improve is the induction process for our new trainees. It's been a big piece of work. We've taken a lot of feedback over the last couple of years to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the trainees. So we did have 1 year, I think that might have affected you a little bit, where equipment was a bit of a problem. So having things like mobile phones and laptops in a timely fashion is really important. So as a service, we've worked really hard to make sure that happens now.
Yeah, I think I will sort of caveat that by also saying, though, that where limitations do exist in terms of equipment and stuff, I found that there were always workarounds. So from my personal perspective, and this wasn't the fault of the organisation, it was actually a big period of upheaval for the organisation that we worked for. And I can really understand why we didn't have all the equipment in place, actually, and there would have been a lot of challenges and hurdles to get those pieces of equipment, so I can really understand why they weren't there.
Yeah.
But that being said, there were always other ways of, for example, contacting clients if we didn't have our mobile phones. So there was sort of online messaging platforms that we could use and did use to great effect. And I think sometimes it's about remembering that in those first few weeks and in your new role, you do have the freedom to act somewhat creatively. Obviously bear in mind the rules of your particular trust and bear in mind the rules and regs that are there, but there is a fair amount of freedom that is afforded to you as well.
Absolutely. And that's really nice to hear, actually, because it's quite stressful when you have got lots of trainees all coming in at one time, to make sure that you're meeting everybody's needs. And if there are hiccups, if equipment hasn't arrived or there are problems with people getting started in placement at the same time because they've got commitments to fulfill with their previous roles, for example, which happens quite a lot. It can make it quite a stressful time. So we've worked really hard and we've taken a lot of feedback to make that better. So you should expect an induction into your service, an introduction to the systems that you'll be asked to use. So your note keeping and record keeping systems, reporting systems. So for things like incidents or safeguardings, you should have some training on that. You should be introduced to your supervisor. And your buddy, if you have one.
Right.
You may have something called managerial supervision as well, so management supervision. I don't know if all services offer that, but we do. And I think it's pretty common in most IAP services. So there's quite a lot going on in those first 2 weeks from a service perspective. But really, it's about getting you, kind of onboarding into the team, meeting people.
Yeah, got you. In terms of what that should look like in terms of the sort of structure of sort of 10 to 12 clients that you are seeing in that initial period, what should that look like? That was a big concern that I've heard a lot from current trainees in terms of, particularly when they're new to this role, they're not quite sure how they should be structuring their days. Do you have any particular preferences or recommendations or any tips on that?
Yeah, as the service that I work for, we really support autonomy, so therapist autonomy. However, there are other services who will populate your diaries for you. And I guess it's really a preference as to how you like to work, as to which one's going to work better for you. Personally, I like the freedom to choose to have back-to-back clients, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So my diary used to look like a 9 o'clock, a 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would have a little break and have a bit of lunch. And I'd normally come back at maybe 1 and then do a 2 o'clock. So that would be 5 clients. My last client would finish at 3 o'clock and that would give me a little bit of time to do my notes.
Mm-hmm.
But I know lots of therapists who don't like to work like that and they need a bit of a gap in between, and that's fine too. As long as you're meeting your clinical commitments, how your diary looks isn't really a problem.
No, I think, as you mentioned, they're finding a style that works for you as well as a really important thing, but also I think affording yourself some time to kind of be a bit kind to yourself during that initial phase as well.
Definitely.
So knowing that there are certain things that come with CBT that don't come to everyone naturally, so things like timekeeping, for example. Shell is laughing at this moment because I can speak from personal experience here. I was a trainee who struggled a lot with keeping things to 50 minutes, particularly when it came to things like guided discovery and things with clients. There would be so many avenues that we could explore, and there were so many interesting things that would kind of come out that it became difficult to sometimes say no to particular opportunities to explore things.
And it goes quick.
And it goes incredibly quickly.
It's an hour, but it just vanishes, and you can think you've just set your agenda and then your time's up.
Yeah.
And you're setting homework again. So,
Exactly that. And so I think just having the space at the end of session to sometimes leak over if you have to. Obviously not so much that you want to be doing sort of hour and a half, 2-hour sessions with clients, because you need to be mindful about their energy levels as well, and really whether they're getting anything after that amount of time.
And remembering as well, actually, that if you do go over, your recordings won't count. So if you're hoping to submit it as a CTSR, for example, it will be cut off. So you might not have covered every item on the CTSR because your homework will have been cut off.
100%.
So it's good practice, I think, to get it as close to your 50-minute as possible.
And I suppose I should clarify, I'm not saying that you should take carte blanche to run sort of timeless sessions.
No.
But I think particularly early on, knowing that it is a skill that needs to be honed.
Definitely.
And giving yourself just a little bit of leeway, particularly to start with, can be quite a powerful thing. And also giving yourself some time to also take care of the admin side of things as well. So things like letters that need to be sent,
Yes.
notes and things like that. And knowing that, particularly when you're a trainee as well, the notes you write tend to be in somewhat greater detail than you would once you're fully qualified as well.
Yeah, definitely. Trainees write War and Peace. You know, every single part of the therapeutic process is covered in detail. And that's okay, that's fine. Your supervisor will hopefully support you into making that a bit more succinct and concise, because it's a very timely pursuit to write notes like that. And you won't want to do it.
Yeah, of course. And also, I mean, there's something to be said about taking the time to reflect on sessions,
Yes.
but also you don't want to be reliving the same session over and over. So not only being in the session once, but then recording it in extreme detail and then reliving it once again when you listen back to the recording, and then maybe a fourth time when you're presenting that recording at supervision as well. Sometimes I get the sense that sometimes it can feel a bit like Groundhog Day, and we kind of want to avoid that where we can as well.
Yeah, and just on the listening back to your recordings. So I got into the habit early on of recording everything and then listening back to it often on my drive home, because I had a really long commute. So I'd just pop it on in the car, listen to it on the way home. And usually within the first 5 minutes, you know, if it's a good one or not. And then I'll be honest, I would stop at that point, stop listening, because you're right, Groundhog Day sets in very quickly, and you can become a little bit just kind of overwhelmed by only having CBT stuff in your head all of the time.
Yeah, definitely. The other question that's sort of comes up a lot, particularly towards the end of the intensive block at the start of the course, and quite an understandable worry, I think, is people tend to often end that period and say, well, how can I practice when I don't know much, and how do I know what I'm doing with clients? And what would your response to that be?
You don't know what you're doing from a CBT perspective yet, but what you should know and what you're bringing to those early sessions are all of the skills that you showed in application and interview. You know, it's already there. You just might have to adapt it a little bit. And you're not going to know all of the protocols, all of the models, all of the treatment pathways yet, but your clients don't know that, which is kind of really worth remembering. Your clients don't know what you're supposed to be doing either. So every single week from university, you will learn something new. And if you're anything like me, you'll be in a rush to go off and practice it with your clients, even when it's not always that appropriate, to be honest. But if you carry on bringing the core conditions, if you care, if you're being empathic, if you're listening, and if you're showing a vested interest and only want the best for the person that you're working with, that's enough at the beginning.
Definitely. I completely agree with that. I think taking quite a strengths-based approach to it as well, and realising that you entered that process with particular skills and not being afraid to utilise those skills immediately and show what you've sort of carried with you from past pursuits can be a really strong thing to do. Also, I think, particularly early on, that's a great way to use supervision.
Yes.
In terms of particularly those earlier supervisions when you're not quite sure what you're doing, this is a great sort of first place to kind of start checking things out, start asking questions and learning from other people's expertise. And also, like we said earlier, leveraging the reading that you might be doing. A really powerful thing to do is just take a read of some of the books that are out there and sort of see what their recommendations are. There's a great book that you actually recommended to me early on, which was the treatment plans book.
The Big Brown Book.
By Bob Leahy.
Yes.
And it covers a multitude of different diagnostic labels within it and provides suggestions for what potential treatment plans could look like.
It's just amazing, isn't it? It breaks it down session by session. It's such a useful tool for a beginner.
Yeah.
But I use it now.
Yeah. And alongside that, it's worth knowing, though, that you don't need to know the journey from A to Z when it comes to therapy. And actually, I think a lot of the time, like any real journey in real life, the therapeutic journey can come up with unexpected twists and turns.
Yeah.
Actually. And it's important to know that you might have a plan for how you're going to get from A to Z, but might not necessarily take that route when you put it into practice.
That's a really good point. I remember being told by a lecturer right at the beginning of the course that they had somebody who came to supervision with an absolutely beautifully drawn out formulation. And it was the client's whole journey from this therapist's mind. It was their idea of what was going to happen. And they'd had 2 sessions. Wow. So, you can have an idea about what might happen, what should happen based on the model and the protocol and the treatment plan. But actually, it rarely goes like that. So don't really think more than a session ahead, I think. Try not to plan too far ahead because things change. Yeah. And you don't need to know it inside and out because there's no point if it's going to be changing all the time.
Definitely. Are there any other sort of helpful hints or tips that you think people would really love to take away with them, just to arm them for their first couple of weeks on the job?
Just to reiterate that point that, go easy on yourself. Don't expect to know what you're doing. You don't, and that's okay. You will learn, and that's why you're a trainee. Mm-hmm. Your clients will know that you're a trainee because we have to tell them. Mm-hmm. But they don't necessarily know what stage you're at, and you mightn't be their fit, and that's okay too. You may have people who don't want to work with you because you're a trainee, and that's fine. Try not to take that personally. It does happen, but it doesn't mean that they don't think you're a good person or that you're going to be unable to help them. It happens to doctors, it happens to midwives. Yeah. As soon as the trainees are mentioned, people say, no thank you, get me a real one. And that's okay, that's fine. People are allowed to have choice, but don't take it personally. Just be confident in the skill that you're already bringing. There's a reason that you're on the course, and the reason that you're on the course is not because you're a fantastic CBT therapist yet.
Definitely. If you are on the training journey this year, or any year actually, and you are just starting out and want to share your experience, or if you've got any other burning questions or issues that you would like to see us cover on the show, drop us a line on Twitter at @TLS_pod, or get through to us via email at twolostsoulspodcast@gmail.com. And speaking of our mailbag, here is a little segment that we like to call Socratic Questions.
Okay, so we've had a question, and it's from Karima from Watford. Thanks for getting in touch. So the question is, I'm really worried about getting recordings with my clients and the prospect of asking them for permission. I've heard from people that if I offer clients too much of an option, they might refuse. I want people to give informed consent, but also I don't want to end up with no recordings for my course. What's the best way for me to ask for recordings from my clients?
I think that is a brilliant question.
It really is a very good question.
I think there is a lot said sometimes by people leading courses and sometimes academic supervisors that I've heard who've sort of said that you sort of need to stack the cards in your favour, and sometimes it can feel quite guilt-inducing actually to feel like you're not giving clients the option or the ability to kind of opt out of recordings. Generally, I suppose the way I typically have that conversation with clients, and even though I've passed now, I still record my sessions because I think recordings are still a really useful tool to be able to reflect on practice. And if I had more hours in the day, I would definitely bring recordings to supervision. You've heard it here on record.
You still have to, even when you qualify.
This is true.
There isn't a set number now, but you still got to.
This is true. This is true. And I will soon.
Or we'll just do a live one, as we discussed earlier.
Brilliant. You've also all got that on record as well. But essentially, I generally bundle the conversation on recordings in with initial conversations on confidentiality.
Yeah.
So the usual stuff around us holding confidentiality as a service and knowing that information will remain in the service unless there is risk to someone or to someone that they're associated with, and knowing that we will have to share information as a result. Firstly, generally people will accept that and will have heard that sort of stuff before. And following on from that, I would say next that I'm generally asked to record my sessions, essentially so a supervisor can listen into my half of the conversation and make sure that I'm asking the right questions and providing them with the right support. And generally phrasing it like that and kind of taking the focus off them a little bit has, I think, been quite helpful, and they've mostly been up for recordings. In fact, I don't think I've had a single client who's said no.
That's good.
So far. And I've done, apparently, according to my latest logs, over 300 hours of therapy. So I've been quite potentially fortunate with that. And I'm just wondering, I mean, how would you typically handle that?
Yeah, I was a bit more direct, I think. I kind of just said, I have to. It's a requirement of my course. I have to present recordings. I'd really like your consent to do that. I was very explicit about what happened to the recordings. So I think probably 90% of everything that I recorded was deleted almost immediately, because it kind of, the session didn't provide the stuff that I needed to either take with a question or to use as a CTSR. So most of it was immediately deleted. The stuff that was listened to and or submitted, something I did experience. So I had a client who was really proud to have been one of my case studies, because we had done a really good piece of work together. And when I kind of talked about using her stuff, her kind of experience, she was really pleased that it might go on to help other people learn. So
amazing. That
was really nice, and I think I hope that isn't really unusual, because it's very valuable what they're offering, what people are offering me, and then to trainees of the future potentially. So yeah, I never, like you, I never really had a problem. I think I had one person who said no. Was absolutely fine, completely respected that. I had a full caseload, so I was lucky that I had lots of other option. And it's, individual choice, so it was fine. But I've not really known anybody have a problem with it.
No, and I think it's also worth noting that although I think best case scenario and best practice means that you are going to record everything, it's not the end of the world if not every session is recorded.
No, it isn't.
And I say that obviously there's a rather large element of sod's law to this, in that you might have a really great session with someone and think, oh, that's CTSR worthy, but then realise that they declined consent to record, which you might end up feeling as though you've got to beat yourself up over. Or alternatively, just reflecting on sort of supervision, as we kind of discussed earlier, from my recollection of the training process, although it was really daunting to present clips to start with, supervision without recordings actually became a lot more painful.
Definitely.
In terms of people having to speak more to present a case, and everyone else, in terms of the other peers in the group, not really getting a feel for the dynamic in the room that's between the therapist and the client, and being able to provide, some really good questions surrounding that, because they weren't able to get that sort of objective view, really.
Good point. And the other point I think that comes from that is that you want to take your rubbish stuff as well.
Yes.
So whilst I said that I would get rid of 90%, that doesn't mean I was only keeping the good stuff. you want to take the stuff that goes really badly wrong,
Yes.
or you just completely cock it up, because that's where your learning's going to come from. And it normalizes it for your peers. If you're taking it to university supervision, you can all be a bit rubbish together.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's quite nice when other people say, yeah, I've been there, I've done that too. It's horrible. But your supervisors don't just want to hear the great examples, because they won't believe you.
Yes, exactly. And when it comes to being graded on your supervision as well, that will come up in the feedback. If it sounds as though you've only selected brilliant clips or good clips the whole way through and haven't really shown much in terms of things that you might need to improve on, it will definitely be brought up as a suggestion for you in the marking. And I'm not quite sure, given that I'm not a university marker, but I'm not quite sure how much that would impact on your chances of passing that supervision block as well, because if you're going into supervision and not using it as the reflective tool that it's meant to be, could someone really argue that are you really using supervision for what it's meant to be there for?
Yeah. Are you learning? Or even are you recognizing when it isn't going well? Because that would be more of a problem. If you think that everything's brilliant, I'm going to tell you it won't be. Everything won't be brilliant. So if you're not able to recognize that and then own it a little bit, then that is right that it gets pulled up, I think.
Yeah, definitely. We have kind of explored a bit of a tangent with the recording side of things, but we hope that the advice that we kind of started off there was sort of useful to you out there. And I think everything else that we've covered with that as well is testament to the importance of recordings on the course as well, and throughout your professional career. But if you've got any more queries on that, feel free to get in touch. Our next question for today's episode comes from Danny in Solihull, who says, long-time listener, first-time tweeter. Where did you get the inspiration for the podcast name?
Oh, where did we get the inspiration?
Well, we're both quite keen Pink Floyd fans.
Yeah, 100%. Love them.
I suppose to an extent, I'm wondering if there's sort of layers to the name as well, in terms of sometimes when you're on the CBT training journey, you can feel quite lost.
Yeah.
And knowing that, I suppose that doesn't really leave you. I think if, and here's a spoiler alert to some of you out there, if you think that this course might cure some of the imposter syndrome that might be setting in at the end of the first 2 weeks, it doesn't. And an imposter syndrome, I think, not only is something there that will continue throughout your career, but in a way is actually really helpful.
Yeah.
For you in terms of something that can serve as a bit of a motivating factor for you to develop your knowledge and continue to learn.
Yeah.
And so I think it could have been almost a subconscious commentary on that as an added layer.
I was just coming at it from the Pink Floyd, and it's my favourite line in my favourite song. So.
Oh, there we go then.
I'm not that deep.
No, clearly after we settled on the name, I spent too much time thinking about it.
Yeah.
So that's given you all an idea as to what goes on in my mind.
Yeah, very different processes there, weren't there?
Very. Yeah. But the common link was in Pink Floyd. And if you haven't heard Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, it is a brilliant album. And so I highly recommend that everyone listen to it.
Yeah, they probably haven't, because most of the trainees now are born 1990 or something ridiculous.
True, but I think Pink Floyd have had somewhat of a resurgence.
Yeah.
And people like vintage fashions and vintage music.
That's true.
And I think there'll be a fair few new fans out there if they haven't heard of it. Again, we're not sponsored by Pink Floyd in any way, or Roger Waters, or David Gilmour.
No.
But if Pink Floyd did want to reach out and give us some free merch or something, we probably wouldn't say no.
Yeah, I definitely would not say no.
No. Cool.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, though, if you have, I don't know why I've got ginger in my throat. That's why
Is it still there? That little can, it's really messed you up.
It's a very powerful thing for such a little can.
Yeah, but don't you feel energised?
I feel it's triggered my internal fight or flight response. So in
Oh,
a
dear.
sense, yes.
Okay, I'll take that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to Shell and thank you to Lidl.
Good old
I
Lidl.
will treasure this. I'm currently keeping a lot of craft beer cans at home, and
Okay.
this can sit proudly amongst it, I think.
Well, next time I'll bring you just the ginger,
Just the
because
ginger.
they do just the ginger one as well. So
We'll find out whether that's more or less painful for me.
it's definitely less.
Less.
Definitely
Okay.
less.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my mum won't forgive you, given that you're taking the turmeric out. So
Oh, yeah, we'll stick with this one then.
okay.
The original, the
Yeah.
best.
I should add. So I don't know whether we're keeping this in the edit or not, but if we are, I should add that the references to my mum are that she really loves turmeric as a remedy for stuff, anything and everything. If you've got cramp, have some turmeric. If you've got a cold, have some turmeric. If you need to access the IAP service, take turmeric instead. Don't though. If you feel you need to access the IAP service, access the
IAP service. Yeah, turmeric's not fixing that.
No.
No,
12 sessions with us will be much better.
I think so.
Yeah.
With turmeric, maybe.
We don't provide that as a
No.
You will have to bring your own
NHS
turmeric.
are not funding ginger
No.
and turmeric shots.
No.
Yet.
Though you never know.
Never do.
But just to round off today's episode, if you have enjoyed or learnt anything from today's show, be it about CBT, IAPT or turmeric, please give us a follow and let us know on Twitter at TLS_pod or by email at twolostsoulspodcast@gmail.com. Or if you can do, please consider donating to our Ko-fi at kofi.com/TLS_pod. Links to all of those places are in the show notes. And if there is someone you know who would benefit from hearing Two Lost Souls, please, please, please share this show with them. It is a really huge help to us. And all that's left to do, first of all, is to thank all of you for listening, first of all. And also say a big thank you to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Ravi.
And leave you with the news that finally a new CBT service has launched for portrait artists. It will mainly concentrate on reframing.
Oh.
Thank you for listening. See you next week. Two Lost Souls was presented by Ravi Amrath and Michelle Sudbury. To get in touch, contact TLS_pod on Twitter or email twolostsoulspodcast@gmail.com.